Welcome once again to this edition, our latest edition of Centerview, which is our monthly virtual discussion series sponsored by Baltimore's oldest and preeminent business networking and dining club, the Center Club. As you know, and as I say every time, our aim is to feature the people and the issues impacting our present, shaping our future, as well as the doers and the movers from across our region who are creating momentum, making a positive difference. I'm your host, Greg Tucker. I'm a Baltimore City resident since 1997. I'm an independent strategic communications advisor working and living here in the city that we all know and love. Today, we're especially honored to have as our guest Senator Chris Van Hollen, elected in 2016 to represent Maryland in the United States Senate. By way of introduction, I'll give a very cursory overview here. Senator Van Hollen, who's the oldest of three, was born in Karachi, Pakistan, of all places, as the son of parents who had long and very esteemed careers in government and foreign service in particular. Senator Van Hollen spent parts of his early life in Pakistan, Turkey, India, Sri Lanka. He eventually graduated from Swarthmore College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy. I'm a philosophy major as well, Senator, so I know like minds here. And then continued his studies at Harvard University, where he earned a Master's of Public Policy degree concentrating in national security studies from the John F. Kennedy School of Government. He went on to earn his law degree at Georgetown University Law Center. His life in public service began in Maryland at the Maryland General Assembly in 1991, and he was elected to serve the 8th Congressional District in the House of Representatives in 2002. There's much to recount from his years in the House, given his leadership position in many legislative pursuits and accomplishments, but for the sake of time, I'll keep moving. Then Congressman Van Hollen was elected to replace longtime Senator Barbara Mikulski in 2016, and currently serves on the Appropriations, Banking and Housing and Urban Affairs, as well as the Committees on Foreign Relations and Budget. Senator Van Hollen is known for working to find common sense solution to our difficult national issues and collaborating in a bipartisan manner whenever, if ever, that's possible, to achieve a consensus that's necessary in order to get things done in Washington on behalf of Maryland and the American people. So I want to welcome you, Senator, with that speed dial introduction. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day in Washington. I believe you've got a full schedule today and this evening in the Senate, but we're delighted you've made time for us. So welcome.
Well, Greg, it's great to be with you, and thank you for hosting this series at the Center Club. And I'm looking forward to our conversation with you and folks who are tuning in.
Thank you. Let me start off by this. I sort of did this quick bio of you, which is fascinating. Having your experience overseas, living internationally like that certainly does shape one's out. I had the benefit of living overseas with my family for 7 years in the Netherlands, and it affords a perspective that's so valuable, I think. But let me go back a little bit further, asking you how, frankly, what motivated you to pursue a life of public service? It's often a thankless job, especially in this environment. But I'm interested to hear what led you there and how you see that as still such a meaningful way to contribute.
Sure. Well, it's great to be with you, and I hadn't realized you'd spent some time in the Netherlands. As you know, Van Hollen has some
yes,
Dutch heritage there, but. Here in a nutshell is sort of the story and what got me motivated to get involved in public service. My dad was born in Baltimore. He then went into the Navy, and then he went into the Foreign Service. He met my mom, who was the daughter of an English teacher from Massachusetts, who became a Russian language expert and became very focused on international affairs. And so it was a good partnership. My dad went into the Foreign Service. And as you said, it's like a military family. You move around mostly back and forth from overseas, and that did shape, my views of the United States as an example to the rest of the world in terms of promoting democracy and freedom and human rights. But it also caused me to, hold up a little bit of a mirror to back here at home to see whether or not we were really living up to those ideals. And as you know, we've made a lot of progress over our history, but we have a long way to go when it comes to issues of social justice, racial justice, building economic opportunity for all. So I decided to take the plunge and get involved in elected office when I ran for the Maryland legislature. And then, as you said, later ran for Congress. I do see it as a way, one of many ways. A lot of people tuning in are certainly helping our community and country in lots of different ways, but I saw elective politics as a way to try to make a positive change for our state and our country.
Absolutely. Well, I continue to believe it is a noble profession, and those, of course, motivated by the best intentions, you know, really can move the needle and change for the better lives individually and collectively in our city and state. So thank you for that. You know, you were very outspoken. Again, this is we've lived through an unprecedented time in so many levels. It's almost becoming a cliche to keep saying that, but it really is. And you were very outspoken in the wake of the January 6th assault on the Capitol, and called even for invoking the 25th Amendment to remove Donald Trump, something you asserted should have been done much sooner. It was certainly an episode that none of us could have imagined. And in your view, I'm curious, we were just talking before we got started. Had the benefit to work in the House as a press secretary many years ago, and it was a different time, a different atmosphere. But how did we get to this state of fierce party tribalism? What I refer to as the politics of enemeyism. If you're not with us, you're against us. When in fact, as you know, our whole system is predicated on finding consensus and compromise. How did we get here? And more importantly, how do we get out of it?
Well, these are very big questions. And, you know, these are the questions I think we're grappling with in our politics today. How do we tackle issues as a country, because we face so many challenges? How do we overcome these differences? And of course, you know, the whole system of democracy is one where we don't expect everybody to agree. In fact, we have vigorous debates. I mean, democracy is a messy business, but we do expect everyone to, you know, observe certain rules of democracy, starting with our Constitution, the rule of law, democratic norms. And of course, throughout our history, you know, we've seen lots of stresses, the biggest one being the Civil War, where people were not able to resolve those fundamental questions peacefully. But for the most part, we try to do it peacefully. What we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm not saying it sprung spontaneously in the last 4 or 5 years, but certainly the polarization has intensified. The former president, I don't think there's any disputing that his sort of political approach was to try to pull himself up politically by dividing people against one another based on race and religion and ethnicity. In any event, this of course all came to a head on January 6th, when after the November elections, the President Trump decided to deny the results, despite 62 lawsuits around the country, despite his own Department of Justice, despite his own Department of Homeland Security. And we saw, as you know, Greg, the attack on the Capitol on January 6th.
Yep.
And that was a violent mob, and the date was not a random date. That was the date we were assembled to count the Electoral College vote, to make it formal, to formalize the victory of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And so that is a day that will live in infamy in our country. And it was an attack from within, not an attack from without, like Pearl Harbor or 9/11. Mm-hmm. And how we move on from here is the test of our time. We have been a resilient democracy, but we are being tested. And I don't have any easy answer to your question. I will say over the last couple of years during the pandemic, we were able to find common ground in the Congress on some big issues. I mean, we're about a year from when we passed the CARES Act, which was the first comprehensive emergency response. And we did do that on a bipartisan basis. And we did a number of important bills after that. After President Biden was sworn in and he unveiled the American Rescue Plan, something I thought was very important. Unfortunately, we did not continue to see that bipartisan support. But All of us need to do our part by reaching out to people we disagree with, not because we will persuade one another, but because I think part of a democracy is to, try to have a civil exchange of views within those norms that we talked about.
I would, of course, there's a lot of attention to the Senate, given given this, well, there's basically even split, and what you've just pointed out, that the level of partisanship continues. And do you think there's a lot discussion of what are the prospects, do you think, for the Biden administration on some of these big issues? When we talk about infrastructure, we talk about so many vital areas that we're going to cover in a little bit later on. But give us your perspective from where you sit in the U.S. Senate.
Sure. Well, of course, any presidential administration has a number of tools at its disposal. I mean, there are things that they can do via executive order, and President Biden, by executive order, has already been able to reverse a number of things that the Trump administration put through by executive order, right? So rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, re-engaging with the World Health Organization, a number of things. And, those are important steps in my mind that he's taking. But of course, we'd like to have enduring change. And that means, not executive orders, but trying to put things in law. So the American Rescue Plan was a very ambitious and a very important bill in my view, and I think will help, bring the pandemic to an end sooner than otherwise, help those who are most hurt, and give our economy a lift. And we can talk about some of the specifics later if you're interested. Mm-hmm. But we were not successful at getting any Senate Republicans on board. We used a procedure called budget reconciliation. The American public is getting a quick lesson in everything from filibusters to reconciliation, but we were not able to do that on a bipartisan basis, but it was important to get done. Where from here? Look, as you just said, we're debating the infrastructure modernization bill. You called the American Jobs Act. I suspect as early as tomorrow, if not Wednesday, when he addresses the nation from Congress, State of the Union type address, he's going to unveil, President Biden, the American Families Act, which will focus on education and other priorities. We're going to be debating these, right through, whether or not we have to, in the end, use the same procedure, the budget reconciliation procedure, to try to pass them the majority. I don't know. We have, and President Biden has reached out to our Republican colleagues, and we don't know what pieces may succeed, what won't. I should also point out, as you know, a lot of bills have come over from the House, including something called the For the People Act, which is designed to establish basic protections for voting rights. I'd like to see that passed. I don't want to leave this part right here without mentioning, though, that in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, one of the committees I serve on, last week we passed an important bill with every member, Republican, Democrat, except for one. And that was to develop a national strategy to address the challenge of China, both in terms of the economic competition, but also how China's sort of using its power and economic clout around the world to convert more countries to sort of their approach, their more authoritarian approach. And so, at least so far, we're moving that bill forward in what I hope will continue to be a bipartisan basis.
Given that excellent segue, given your position on the Foreign Relations Committee, in addition to your own personal experience of living internationally, how do you think? Well, of course, the way America is viewed is, I imagine, has gone through, or I understand has gone through quite a bit of the evolution over the last few years, and we've certainly had a very inward, some would contend, isolationist posture over the past several years, and now it's about achieving that proper balance of the need to be a force in setting the global agenda. We live in a global economy while also dealing with the critical issues we face here at home. And so I wanted to, you introduced, I know, the National Strategy to Ensure American Leadership, the SEAL Act, to strengthen America's competitive edge. Those are real issues, and some would argue that was something Trump forced and put on the national agenda, sort of to try to strike a better balance. But I'm going to open it or leave it to you to characterize that. But how do we regain our footing on the international stage?
Sure. Well, I've always believed that, the United States needs to be strong at home and engaged with the rest of the world. And when I say strong at home, I don't just mean our military power. Obviously, that's important to defending U.S. interests, but I mean being strong as a society, having a robust modern infrastructure, making sure that we have the best education system for our kids, and making sure that we invest in cutting edge technology so that we can compete in today's global marketplace. And what we've seen in China, and as they developed what they called their China 2025 plan, was their blueprint for leading the world in areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, clean energy technology, biomedicine, areas where the United States historically has invested more here at home, but we have not done enough recently. We got caught completely, by surprise with the 5G, in the 5G battle, which China is, using to try and use its technology and communications in place around the world. So bottom line is that Roy Blunt, who's a senator from Missouri, and he's Republican, teamed up and introduced the bill you just referenced to get the National Academies of Science and Engineering to come up with a blueprint for where we need to be investing, a strategy for ourselves. And we're also working on a bipartisan basis here on something called the Endless Frontier Act, which would actually focus resources through the National Science Foundation and others to some of these critical areas of cutting edge technology. The United States has to maintain its edge, both in terms of giving our people the job opportunities of the future, but also because it's a global world out there, and we need to make sure that our values and our principles are front and center. And this is one area where I believe the last administration did not adequately push sort of U.S. Our values overseas in terms of working with our allies, whether in NATO or Asia. We were often fighting with our friends and giving comfort to authoritarian leaders. My view is we should be focused. We should be doing more of the opposite.
There's so much on that front I'd love to discuss with you, especially Russia and sort of what the prospects there are for any sort of relationship. Can you touch on that briefly? That's of course with the recent sanctions that have been imposed, and the view I've heard expressed is that the best he can do is sort of just contain him and manage, but the prospects of any sort of real relationship and a resetting are probably pretty dim. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, before I ran for elective office, I was very involved in nuclear arms control issues, and I think we all remember the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was great hope that our two countries could have stronger relations, but in my view, Vladimir Putin has sort of taken that off the rails. He's, ruled Russia with an iron hand, authoritarian approach. And of course, the invasion of Crimea, and then his, continued, militarization along the border in Ukraine, and then clamping down on human rights. And so, my view is with Russia, there are areas where, as two powers in the world, we need to cooperate. One is on nuclear arms control. And I was pleased to see, it hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but the former administration did not extend what's called the New START Treaty, which applies limits to our strategic nuclear arsenals. The presidents had the ability to extend it for another 5 years. One of the first things President Biden did when he was sworn in is he is now extending it. It expired in February. That's important. And if you ask our folks in the Pentagon and the military folks, they think it was a good idea to make sure that we have nuclear arms control agreements in place with the Russians. It's in our interest to work with them and China and others on the climate agenda. I mean, we're one planet, so no country can do it all alone. But when it comes to these other issues, for example, Russia's aggressive steps toward Ukraine, pushing its neighbors who see it as a threat, it is important that we stand with our friends. So look, my view, Greg, is that you look for areas where it's smart to cooperate, but be clear-eyed about what you're dealing with Vladimir Putin.
Right. Let's turn a moment now to the American Rescue Plan, which you referenced, and which the Biden administration championed and Congress finally passed, as you noted, without any Republican support. It unquestionably represents a once-in-a-generation, maybe, opportunity for Maryland and for Baltimore to get some $670 million in critical funds, and of course Maryland about $4 billion, I believe. Our mutual friend Wes Moore recently made the point in his editorial that this is an opportunity to finally address poverty, which in Baltimore here the rate is 21%, and we've lost population. And of course, Baltimore is nearly doubled between December 2019 and December 2020, going from 4.2% to 7.9%. And then this, of course, exposing the gap, the equity gap, even more. How do we seize this unprecedented infusion of much needed federal funding to achieve the purpose of reviving the economy here in Baltimore and Maryland, and at the same time getting people back to work and beginning to close those persistent inequity gaps that have sidelined too many for so long?
Well, you're right. The American Rescue Plan is it's a ambitious and comprehensive plan, and it contains lots of elements. I think of them in like 3 buckets. One are the provisions that help individuals and families that have been hard hit. And in that category, we have everything from the one-time payments to families with eligible incomes, to importantly, a big increase in the child tax credit, to the point where 82,000 Maryland kids will be lifted out of poverty. Now we have to extend that permanently. That is a down payment in this bill. And one of the things we expect in the American Families Act, which I think President Biden will either unveil tomorrow or the next day, is to make that permanent. But just to give you an example, that cut childhood poverty in America in half for the coming years. We want to make it permanent. You also have another set of provisions for folks who are unemployed and still looking for work. And the economy's coming back, which is good news. So that's one bucket. Then there are provisions for small businesses. Those have been essential from the beginning. There was a rocky rollout about a year ago of the PPP program, but if you talk to businesses around Maryland, a lot of them that has been their life preserver, and we improved it over time to help the smallest businesses and minority-owned businesses that had sort of been left out of the structure of the original piece because it was harder to access those funds. So that's been a very important part of it. Beating the pandemic, that there's lots of resources for that part, but then the other part is what you're talking about, which are funds directly to help sort of public institutions. So schools, colleges, our infrastructure, so the transit system in Baltimore and around the state, our airports, BWI, Thurgood Marshall, all of these received important help, as did the state of Maryland and Baltimore City. And you mentioned, Greg, the numbers for Baltimore City, and they are substantial. $670 million in support for the city, and I mentioned on top of that, you have funds for the city schools.
Right.
Those monies should, really help provide opportunities, both to help people who are in need because of the pandemic, but also do some things for the longer term. One of the things we can do for the longer term is deal with the digital divide. As you say, the pandemic has exposed deep inequities in so many of our systems, including healthcare, but also the way we're meeting right now,
Right.
on Zoom, digitally. And building out broadband, high-speed internet is essential. We've done that. Part of the American Rescue Plan is a substantial amount of money to better connect kids in school. But there are other resources there to help build it out. And Baltimore City or any jurisdiction can also use its funds for that purpose. The state of Maryland is using a lot of the money it got from the American Rescue Plan and others for this purpose. So closing the digital divide is a important and I think bipartisan initiative.
Excellent. I know we're gonna move in a moment to our participants' questions and all, but you've been you're at the forefront of pushing for major changes in so many areas and a wide range of initiatives, from banning high capacity magazines. There's a way to end the tragedy of mass shootings here in this country, comprehensive climate control, ending American dependence on fossil fuels, increased support for child care, Head Start programs, broadening access to affordable housing, and of course, critical infrastructure investment. You have to be all things to all people, members of Congress, and certainly, address the broad range of needs and what you believe has the greatest prospect of getting accomplished in the coming year. Now that the American Recovery Act is law, and given the near equal composition of the Senate, I just wondering what do you think is, you think the infrastructure is probably going to happen? Is that again maybe forced through budget reconciliation? Is that the
right? So there, as you say, there are lots of priorities.
Looking at a question from a member who said, "Ask about infrastructure."
Yeah, no, and so there are a lot of priorities, and as you say, the American Rescue Plan does include a lot of resources that could be used by the city of Baltimore or by the state for some of these areas. For example, one of the things that the city is allowed to use its money for under the American Rescue Plan, which we already passed, is building out its water and sewer capacity, just by way of example. And I'll get to the infrastructure bill in a minute, but then we also have our annual appropriations process, right? I'm on the appropriations committee. I just talked to Senator Mikulski the other day. We keep in regular communication. She served on that committee. But that's a way to also make investments in everything from making sure we help keep the Chesapeake Bay, we have a healthier Chesapeake Bay, to making sure we dredge the channel in the Chesapeake Bay to ensure that the Port of Baltimore is viable. I mean, tens of millions of dollars are spent every year by the Army Corps of Engineers to keep the Port of Baltimore in strong shape. So we have those ongoing appropriations, but what we know is that despite our annual investments nationally in infrastructure, we still have these huge gaps, right? The American Society for Civil Engineers is giving us really failing grades none of us would have wanted to bring home, D's and F's and C minuses across our infrastructure. So we've got to make this investment. And I agree with President Biden that, you cannot look at infrastructure simply through the prism of the 20th century. Yes, we need to modernize our bridges and our roadways and our transit systems, but we also have these other examples, broadband being a clear one, but our housing infrastructure has fallen down. We need a major investment in that area. Our energy grid, we need to move to a cleaner energy economy going forward. It's something I've worked on. I have a lot of my own pieces of legislation in. Some have been adopted in the Biden plan. I was pleased to have them included. So what are the prospects of getting it done? I think we're going to get something done. And I'm going to push, we're pushing very hard. I really want to try and get through the entire Biden plan. I don't mean word for word, but in terms of its scope, and impact, I think that's what our country needs right now to fully modernize our infrastructure across the board. And so my view is we should continue to ask Republicans to join us, but we can't be patient forever. We've got to move forward. I think the American public supports this. The polling shows, the surveys show, it's very popular across party lines. And I think we need to move it forward. So if that means doing it through reconciliation, yes, I would definitely move forward that way if we can't get Republicans to support the plan.
Well, again, once in a lifetime opportunity, it seems.
Yes.
To finally make meaningful progress in these critical areas. Let me open it to our participants. We've come to that moment where you can, if you would, either share your screen or turn your video on. You can unmute yourself, and you can also use the chat feature at the bottom there to submit your question. Either we'd like you to do so. Use your name and all, but if you wish to do so anonymously, we'll accept that as well. So our first question, I see Rufus is there. Rufus, you've always got good questions. People. So again, it's your turn to ask Senator Chris von Hollen what you'd like to,
Yeah, Chris is an old friend, and it's awfully nice to see you again, Chris, and thank you for all the continuing excellent work that you're doing. After January 6th, and given the fact that it seems 150 Republican elected legislators still don't recognize Biden's victory and his being legally and properly the president of the United States, it seems like there needs to be some kind of re-education process. I don't know how you deal with that, but I'm wondering particularly, is there going to be a House and Senate committee that is going to delve deeply into January 6th?
Well, Rufus, it's good to see you too, and thanks for all you do for our communities and state. And January 6th, it was one of those wake-up calls for the country in terms of the need to get our democracy back on track, and we've clearly got a long way to go. At the swearing in of the new president at the Capitol on January 20th, the inaugural, you both saw the resilience of our democracy, the fact that we were continuing to pass the torch, but you also saw the dangers because we were surrounded by the National Guard, thousands of National Guard, 2 sets of fencing that encased the Capitol of inner perimeter and outer perimeter. So it really was a statement of where we are, both in terms of the resilience, but also the risks right now. If our country continues to be, so much of our country continues to be in denial. And of course, the former president is keeping this big lie alive. And without it being aided and abetted, as you say, by unfortunately members of the House and the Senate who continue to perpetrate this lie and voted against the election results that had come in from the state. So I do think it's important to establish a 9/11 type commission. But as you've probably seen, there's a lot of churning over what the mandate will be and what the direction the commission will take. And the way we establish these commissions is the different members of the House and the Senate from both parties get to appoint people, and it also, the design of the commission has to get through the Senate. And right now we have the filibuster rule, which means that Mitch McConnell can block it with 40 Republican votes. And so, Kevin McCarthy, who's the Republican leader in the House, and Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, are using that leverage to try to shape this commission in a way that will not do justice to what happened. The last thing we want is for a commission to become a platform for some commissioners to spew the big lie. So we're, again, trying to shape it. Obviously, we want input from both parties. But we do not want a commission that will become a joke because it is used by some, not to find out what happened and bring truth to what happened, but use it as a platform just to further, fraudulent claims. So we're working through it. I think it would be an important thing for the country to do, but we need to make sure that we have kind of the seriousness of purpose that we saw with the 9/11 commission with Lee Hamilton and Tom Kane, who came together as Americans to focus on the threat from 9/11. We need to come together as Americans to deal with this threat to our democracy from within.
Well, thank you very much. A quick follow-on question, totally switching. Anything on the SALT tax? The legislature in Maryland did sort of some kind of a fix to it. It seems a little bit quirky, but do you think the SALT tax is going to go away, or is it here to stay?
Right. So I think for others listening, the SALT tax, of course, is the state and local tax that was put into the tax bill in 2017, which ended up raising taxes on lots of people, especially in states like Maryland, where we have state and local governments that want to invest in our schools, in our transportation systems. And by applying that tax, the SALT tax, meant that they were being double taxed. On the dollar they sent to Annapolis for schools and transportation, they were also being taxed on now at the federal level. So, Rufus, we are looking for ways to eliminate, scale back the SALT tax that you referenced. It was clearly targeted at blue states, and again, puts at a disadvantage those states that want to invest in their communities, which also happen to be the states that are the highest economic and job performers in the country.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm talking. I was on mute. I apologize. Lisa, you had your hand raised. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Hang on a second.
There you are, Lisa Hayes. There you are.
I think it's nice to see me when I'm actually talking. So, Senator, thank you for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. I'm an estate planning attorney with PNC, so very interested in your STEP Act, the Sensible Taxation and Equity Promotion Act, and actually was listening to a program about it right before I got onto this call and analyzing it in the Sanders Act. Was wondering your thinking behind two aspects of it. One is making it retroactive to January 1st, which is, probably know as its challenges for planners. Yeah. And then also the idea that assets held in non-grantor trusts would be deemed sold every 21 years. How you sort of see that being handled?
Right. Well, thanks for asking. And I should say that what I've introduced, we have not introduced the bill yet, right? We've introduced a pretty detailed working plan, and we did it that way for the purpose of soliciting input before final introduction. So welcome any suggestions. I mean, the overall thrust of the bill, as you know, is to address the issue of income equality and have more revenues to invest in, our kids' education so that everyone can be successful. We'd like everyone to be successful and have a chance at success. But I do think it's a problem in our system where we have a tax code that essentially rewards making money off of money more than rewards making money off of work through, employment and wages. And as you know, this has become a vehicle for people to pass on large sums of wealth from generation to generation without the income tax. And so that the goal is to address that issue. Now, in terms of the date, my guess is that this will change. What happens with these tax provisions is you don't want everybody taking action to avoid the tax. Look, this is going to be important. We don't know yet what President Biden's going to submit, but we're hearing he's going to submit something that could track this quite closely. And so the main reason you do that is to put people on notice as of a certain period of time. Obviously, it wasn't retroactive from the time the proposal was put out there. It's to say, hey, because a lot of transfers can take place, obviously, in the interim. So look, we're happy to work with people on this. That was more by way of, it's not supposed to catch anybody unawares. It's supposed to be like a notice provision, right? Everyone's on notice this could happen. So my guess is in the to and fro of the legislative process that will change. As to the 21 years on trust, we're happy to take any suggestions. We're just trying to figure out a way to do this in a practical way that also gives people time to plan going forward. So I have a great economic policy advisor. His name is Harry Stein. If you want to follow up with him on suggestions, we welcome that. As I say, this is a work in progress.
Okay, thank you. I think there is a lot of economic disparity. Yeah. So I'm glad that it's being, you're looking at ways to address it. And it's certainly your proposals, and Senator Sanders and others are getting a lot of attention.
Yes, I'm sure. There's also, in ours, people tend to, so for example, this proposal, I mean, there is $1 million exemption for the gain, capital gain. And there's also a period of time when people can pay out the tax. So it's not like a lump sum due at one time. So we're trying in keeping the principle the same in terms of dealing with the improving the equity in the tax code. We are determined to do that, but we welcome any suggestions as to some of the details.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, Michael Karasik, you had a question, Senator. How do you plan to improve supports for people with disabilities in Maryland?
Well, Michael, thank you for that question, for your work. One of the bills that I was able to get through a number of years ago on a bipartisan basis, and I authored it in the House, was something called the ABLE Act, which was legislation that allows families who have kids, loved ones with disabilities, to put aside monies tax-free to help them during their lives. Kind of like you can save for the College Savings Act for people who want to send their kids to college and begin to prepay. We essentially did the same thing for families with disabilities. And I'm pleased to say that I think all 50 states, including Maryland early on, enacted the state legislation that needed to accompany that to put it in place. Now, right now, we're also focused, and I'm working a lot with Senator Bob Casey from Pennsylvania on additional issues to help people with disabilities. And that's focused primarily on trying to increase support and pay for caregivers, which is a big issue for those who care for people with disabilities. Also making sure that the Medicaid system, which is a real bulwark for families with kids with disabilities, remains strong, despite a number of efforts to cut back on those programs. And then we want to also, phase out some of the, programs. Maryland's already moving in this direction. where you have very sub-minimum wages for people with disabilities in the workforce. We want to create more unity of opportunity there, and I think we're moving in that direction. So those are some of the things, including also making sure that we prevent, scaling back attacks on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and make sure that we can provide protections there as well. And again, welcome any suggestions people have.
Thank you, Michael, for your question. Herb Cromwell notes that West Virginia Senator Manchin is a bit of the man of the hour, holds a lot of sway in a evenly divided Congress, and given his particular leanings. How do we get to, well, he refers to, Herb is asking again about the infrastructure bill. How do we get it done via reconciliation? But it's a good question in a broader sense about one senator's ability to affect so much.
Yeah. Well, first of all, say I don't see Herb, but hi, Herb. We work very closely together in Annapolis on a number of important issues. So this is really the consequence of the narrowest majority you can mathematically have, which is a 50-50 Senate split with the vice president casting the tie-breaking vote, which means any senator, including myself, could, if we chose, make the process more difficult. Now, look, Joe, I know Senator Manchin well. He's obviously from the neighboring state of West Virginia. My hope is at the end of the day, he, supports President Biden's overall plan. It will obviously be changed somewhat as you go through the legislative process. In fact, the way the president submitted his plan, it's not in legislative form. I mean, it's not like he submitted a bill with every comma. So there is room for senators, including Senator Manchin, including myself. I mean, Senator Cardin and I also have proposals that we're making, but we are making them within the context of the overall bill. And you're right, Senator Manchin is now talking about downsizing the bill potentially, which in my view would be a mistake, and we're going to have to debate that within the caucus. But when you have a 50-50 split, every senator has a lot of leverage, and my view is that we definitely have to make, and Senator Cardin and I are working very hard to make sure Maryland is front and center in this process, but it's a national bill, national in scope, and we need to make sure we get it done for the country. The filibuster has not come up, but that's also another big element in our discussions here on the Hill. Although, as you pointed out, Greg, I mean, changing the filibuster is not necessary for getting through the American Jobs Plan, at least most parts of it. There will be elements in that American Jobs Plan, though, that the president has put forward that may not survive what we call this reconciliation process. We actually call it the Byrd bath, after former Senator Byrd, so not B-Y-R-D. And it's a procedure that determines whether the main intent and focus of a provision is budget related,
right,
or whether the main intention is something non-budget related but has a tangential budget impact. If it really is budget related, you can pass it under this budget reconciliation procedure with 50 votes. If it's not, it drops out of the bill.
Right. The Byrd bath. That's a good one. I hadn't heard that. I wanted to ask you about gun control. We've been reminded again in the last couple of weeks, last few weeks, the scourge in American society continues to, and just again, those internationally that look at us just shake their heads in disbelief. How in the world do we get there? And how, with the vast majority of Americans in support of sensible gun laws and proper controls?
Yes, I mean, the overwhelming majority of the American people support these common sense gun safety laws. That's true of Democrats, Republicans, independents, and even if you poll members of the NRA, the National Rifle Association, as individuals, they support the things like the universal background checks because, I mean, who wants guns to fall in the hands of dangerous people? That just defies common sense. And of course, in Maryland, we have sensible state gun laws. When I was in the state legislature, I worked to pass some of them and over the objections of the gun industry. But Maryland's not an island, right? So we are, you know, guns come from other states. I was just on with the mayor on something we did, Mayor of Baltimore, Mayor Scott earlier. Over 65% of the guns used in crimes in Baltimore come from out of state. And, you know, over 85% come from outside Baltimore City, just as an example. So look, the bill that's passed the House already is a background check bill, universal background check bill, closes the gun show loopholes nationally. Here's the thing, that does not have a direct budget impact. So it cannot pass under budget reconciliation. You need to overcome a filibuster. A bill similar to the bill that passed the House, not identical, but similar, was up in the Senate before I was elected in the Senate. I was in the House at the time, where we did pass a background check bill. It was a Joe Manchin, Pat Toomey bill. Okay, just to give you an idea, it was a universal background check bill. It wasn't quite as airtight as the House one, but it was a big step forward. It got, I think it was 55 votes, certainly a majority, 55 out of 100. But the magic number to overcome a filibuster is 60.
Right.
So even though it had a majority in the Senate and certainly overwhelming majority of the country, it failed. So we're going to keep pushing this. But just so you know, I mean, I support eliminating the filibuster rule. We can talk about that. I think it's
yeah, we should touch on that.
Archaic invention, but this is a case where process is substance, and a lot of these bills coming out of the House that cannot pass under budget reconciliation with a simple majority would require at least changes to the filibuster rule to muster the votes. In the meantime, we need to keep pushing. It's just sickening to see both the mass shootings, but also the daily violence, you know, in cities and communities. That you know, look how we've responded to the pandemic, right? Full mobilization of the country, at least now.
Took a little while to get started there,
but you know, we do have a gun violence epidemic, and yet, you know, unfortunately, at least here on Capitol Hill, we have it's pretty much one party now, you know, blocking that legislation.
Yeah, the filibuster. It's just you shake your head. If not now, when would you seize the moment to do away with this? But of course, if you have senators like Manchin and it only takes him or one other, there you are.
Right. I mean, the issue is when will we achieve a 100% consensus in our narrowest of majorities that. You know, Senator McConnell is bent on obstruction, and I'm fine giving people a little bit of time to reach that, you know, conclusion. I think it's, from my perspective, it's pretty obvious we're at that point. But again, you know, we got to bring everybody along, and that's the nature of such a narrow split.
Well, Senator, you've been terrific again to give us your time and on a busy day, and I promise to stay very strict on our timing today, so we won't keep you longer than we said we would. We can't thank you enough again for sharing your insights, your perspective, your leadership in advancing Maryland's and Baltimore's interest in Congress and the U.S. Senate. I'm sure there are moments when you feel it's a thankless job, but we thank you and appreciate all of your efforts on behalf of us at this critical time and in the life of our nation and world. So, Senator.
Greg, let me just close by thanking you for, launching this series and for engaging people in these important conversations. We talked about the future of our democracy, and I think, having citizens engaged in these conversations in this kind of format is really important to what the future holds for all of us. So thank you, and thank everybody who joined us.
Thank you, Senator. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Be well.
Take care.
Good.
Thank you.
Folks, we'll see you next time on Centerview.
Thank you.
Thank you.